Hey guys, welcome back. If you remember when Vex was teased in September, I made a video sort of analyzing her kit and playstyle based on what I could infer, and that was really well received. So with the advent of Zeri, who should be out already by the time you see this video, I wanted to give my thoughts on whether Riot is still going down the 200 years path or if they learned from 2020 and 2021 and are trying to dial things back a bit. So with that said, let's talk about Zeri, the Spark of Zaun. As I mentioned in Vex's video, just about every champion these days revolves around a gimmick that's exclusive only to them. In her case, she was supposed to be a lockdown anti-mobility burst mage, which the game was in sore need of, what with all the high mobility characters running rampant. Despite the community's initial aversion to her ultimate resetting on takedown, I would argue people were more or less tolerant of her. Sure, she does have a decently high ban rate right now, but that's to be expected. Her whole shtick was about flipping the bird on all the popular one-tricks like Zed, Yasuo, Yone, Sylas, Cat, LeBlanc, and Irelia to name a few. Collectively though, the community has accepted her with much less knee-jerk vitriol than those who came before. Speaking of rampant stuff, one that's been a huge point of concern right now is the overabundance of shields in the game. In seasons 9, 10, and the early parts of 11, there was so much healing in the game. Like what was once a niche gameplay element for champs like Zac, Vladimir, and Soraka was now on everyone under the sun. As a response, Riot centralized Grievous Wounds by making counterplay options for every class. Bruisers had Kempung Chainsword, Marksmen had Mortal Reminder, Tanks had Thornmail, Mages had Morellonomicon, Enchanters had Kentek Putrefier. And with the nerfs to Universal Sustain like Ravenous Hunter, Gore Drinker, and whatnot, healing has become much less frustrating to deal with, give or take. Though I still believe it should be reevaluated later down the line, right now it's manageable. A band-aid solution was applied to healing, but not for shielding, which is now the premier rage-inducing thing going on right now. There has been some attempt to introduce counter options to shields, but nowhere near to the same extent as healing. As far as champions go, Renekton and Blitzcrank were both given shield busting properties, and we had Rel back in late 2020, who is kind of redundant since she and Blitz are both supports. In terms of items, Serpent's Fang is the only true anti-shield item, but that's kind of exclusive to just assassins and maybe a few marksmen and skirmishers, that's about it. Shadowflame was introduced in preseason 12, but it's not really an anti-shield item to be completely honest. It's more an all-around solid high AP burst item that just so happens to conveniently be more consistent against shields. Suffice to say, we need more anti-shield options. Of the 15 newest champions, 8 of them have some ability that grants a shield, and if we factor in Immortal Shield Bow being built on Samira and Yone, that brings us to 10. 2 out of every 3 champions have shields nowadays. It's getting obnoxious. Renekton is the anti-shield fighter, so we need an anti-shield mage and marksman. Enter Zeri, Riot's answer to shields for ADCs. Interestingly enough, she also has something I haven't seen in many years, hybrid properties. But in light of being new to the game, we should first talk about her abilities. In a similar fashion to Senna and Jhin, Zeri has a modified basic attack, which is technically a part of her passive, but the wiki likes to separate them. She has a tertiary resource bar, which stores energy charge whenever she walks around or uses burst fire, so you can think of it almost like how Deadman's Plate functions, where over time, she accumulates power, which then has an additional effect at maximum value. Her basic attacks then consume 10 charges to dish out bonus magic damage that quadruples against enemies below 35% health. However, at full charge, her next attack consumes all of it to do a huge amount of magic damage plus extra based on the target's max health while slowing them for 1.5 seconds. What we can gather from this mechanic are 3 things. 1. Zeri has an incentive to not attack, much like Aphelios. You don't want to indiscriminately auto-attack everything in sight because that reduces her effective power. 2. Zeri has a finisher. Based on the way her passive and Q interact, your objective is to treat her auto-attack like Jin's 4th shot, using your basic abilities to get them as low as possible before nuking them with a ton of burst damage. You can either spread out her damage in several rounds, or with one full power shot. 3. Zeri does magic damage, and a lot of it. Unlike Akshan's passive, which only does a small chunk and has no scaling, Zeri's passive hints at the possibility of her being a hybrid attacker. It's honestly a pretty neat idea that raises a lot of questions, some of which I'll get into later. As for her actual passive, it's called Living Battery. This is where the anti-shield property comes into play. Whenever she damages someone with the shield, instead of outright destroying it, she absorbs and takes it for herself. Roughly 60% of the damage she does to a shield is given back to her. While shielded, she gains 10% bonus movement speed. For her passive, this is the simplest I've seen in God knows how long, aside from the basic attack modifier. Now we move on to her Q, Burst Fire. This ability effectively substitutes her basic attack, as its cooldown is the same as Zeri's attack speed. Passively, it increases the slow from a max charge auto attack, but for the active, Zeri shoots out 7 bolts that do physical damage to the first enemy hit and is treated as a basic attack in every sense of the term. So crit chance, on-hit effects, lifesteal, etc, etc. However, it's not a point-and-click attack. Burst Fire is a skill shot, meaning it can theoretically hit multiple targets with one cast, but it also means it can miss. That being said, given that it's an ability, Burst Fire does proc elements that are based on casts like Spellblade, and it has an attack range of 825, allowing her to play from further back if she wants to. The bulk of her neutral game will essentially consist of her using Q multiple times until she reaches maximum charge, then zapping you with her auto attack for big damage. With this in mind, Zeri's primary playstyle is a hit and run attacker who focuses on quick trades or repeated damage. Ultra Shock Laser is almost a direct one-to-one replica of Jinx's Zap, the base version anyway. Zeri fires a Shock Blast that damages and slows the first enemy struck. Sound familiar? Jinx also fires a Shock Blast that damages and slows the first enemy struck. Where the two differ though is the second component. If Zeri's pulse hits a wall or any form of terrain, it transforms into a wider laser with slightly more range that damages all enemies within. Mind you, it does have a longer delay. This ability can serve as a very effective scouting tool because it grants sight of the entire area for roughly 2 seconds, further adding on to Zeri's proficiency in the neutral. Now, no modern day champion in League of Legends is complete without some really wacky gimmick. Akshan has his revive mechanic and hookshot swing, Vex has her ultimate reset, Gwen has her friend zone, Viego has kind of everything about him. Spark Surge is Zeri's gimmick. On its own, it's a standard short-range dash, about the same reach as I would say Echo's Phase Dive or Fiora's Lunge. Afterwards, her next 3 uses of Burst Fire pierce through enemies, effectively granting her Twitch's ultimate in short bursts. But if she uses the dash on a wall or terrain, she vaults over it. When everyone saw this, they were quick to think, oh my god, 200-year strikes again, but honestly, I don't think it's all that bad. Considering we've had Talon and Camille for a very long time now, it's not that obnoxious, only about 800 units, so her maximum dash range is about 850. If you think about Xin Zhao's empowered dash, that's 1100. I've seen worse. Last but not least, her ultimate, Lightning Crash. A burst of magic damage in a massive area around her, and depending on how many champions hit, she picks up stacks of overcharge, each granting her bonus movement speed. She can gain more stacks of overcharge by striking enemy champions with an ability, or charge basic attack, extending her buff duration in the process. During this time, she gains bonus attack speed and deals bonus magic damage on hit. It's been quite a while since we've seen a buff for an ultimate. The last one was Volibear's rework in early 2020. I personally really enjoy super buffs because they very clearly show when a champion is ready for an all-in fight. If you see Aatrox popping World Ender or Vayne casting Final Hour, that's when you know they're either trying to kill you or are backed into a corner. It's a lot more skill expressive than a single instance of damage since the buff itself does inherently nothing. It comes down to the player to use it to the fullest. For all intents and purposes, Zeri's individual abilities are pretty intuitive. Just by looking at her champion reveal trailer, you might think she looks overloaded as all hell. But when you break it down into the key parts, it's honestly not that much more complicated than Jhin or Senna. It might be difficult to get the hang of her Q and auto attack system, but a couple games under your belt and you eventually can get the hang of it. You spend most of your time using Q to rack up stacks, then passive as a finishing blow. Or if you're in a high octane skirmish, you can weave in uncharged auto attacks with her burst fire. At a glance, Zeri isn't an overloaded champion. She doesn't have that many crazy bonus effects like true damage, sustain on target ability, stealth and whatnot. In fact, she doesn't look all that strong based on numbers alone. I think the idea of deciding whether to use your 10 charge attacks versus waiting for a full charge can be a good indicator that separates the bad Zeri players from the good ones. And in a way, it's a form of resource management. Zeri pretty much functions as a manaless champion in the neutral. Burst Fire has no mana cost, so she might very well be the first manaless AD carry in the game. I mean sure, her W, E, and ultimate costs mana, but given the bulk of her damage stemming from Q and passive, she doesn't require mana to do most of her damage. But by adding a charge system, it's exactly like an empowered ability, thus giving the player an incentive to pay attention to what they're doing. Ever since the release of Kalista, the Marksman class drastically increased in playstyle diversity. We're no longer in the era of every ADC playing almost exactly the same way. We have diver rushdown marksmen like Kai'Sa and Samira, we have mid-ranged ability-based attackers like Xayah and now Zeri, and even long-range shooters like Jhin and Senna. The introduction of new subclasses of marksmen have no doubt made the role more accessible and fun to play overall. And Zeri touches on something that still needs more exploration: magic damage AD carry. There have been instances of AP marksman builds in the past. AP Ezreal, AP Vars, AP Twitch, AP Kai'Sa, we're starting to see her pop up again nowadays. But none of them ever lasted very long since according to Riot, that's not how they're supposed to be played. But Zeri seems very ostensibly magic damage. Her passive is magic damage, her W is magic damage, and her ultimate is magic damage, both the initial explosion and the on-hit bonus. Corki is really the only true magic damage marksman we have to date, but with how his abilities are modeled, he plays more like an artillery mage than anything else. I think the reason AP Kai'Sa didn't last very long the first time was because the champion itself was so incredibly overtuned and overloaded. At the time, AP champs had way better defensive options like Zhonya's Hourglass too. Zeri on the other hand doesn't come off the same way. She's a neutral focused hit and run burst attacker, but there is something that has me concerned about her overall design. Two things actually. Do you notice how at the beginning of the video, I spent a lot of time talking about shields running amok as of late, and that Zeri represents the anti-shield marksman just like how Renekton is the anti-shield bruiser? Yet when I went through each of her abilities, none of them interface with Living Battery, like at all. It's as if the passive is just an add-on to the rest of her playstyle, which is exactly what leads to a champion having overloaded kits. Remember, it's not the extent at which a champion has a property, but whether they have it at all. Overloaded champions aren't necessarily overpowered and vice versa. Despite his rather simplistic look and feel, Akshan is considered an overloaded champion because there are so many things in his kit that you can straight up remove and it would not change his fundamental gameplay experience. Zeri doesn't have a massive amount of extraneous features. In fact, I don't see what you can really take out of her Q, W, E, and ultimate. But what you can take out is her passive. Her ability to absorb enemy shields is mutually exclusive from the rest of her kit. I kinda wish they did something more with her passive in conjunction with her attacks. Vex's kit was brilliantly designed because her passive was necessary for each of her abilities and vice versa. Mistral Bolt, Personal Space, and Looming Darkness were simply different ways in which she could apply her Doom and Gloom fear, while Shadow Surge gave her a way to proactively use her passive instead of reactively. Zeri's modified auto attacks synergize with Burst Fire, Spark Surge, and Lightning Crash, as the goal is to maintain her uptime as much as possible, sort of as a way to demonstrate her usage of electricity. True to her passive's name, Zeri is a living battery. Batteries need to charge and they gradually drain over time. That narrative aspect was executed almost flawlessly. It's just the shield component that feels so out of place. Blitzcrank and Renekton were given shield busting properties because it makes sense for them to have it from a thematic viewpoint. Blitz's ultimate is literally an electromagnetic pulse, and if you think of shields being force fields of energy, it makes perfect sense, while Renekton's Ruthless Predator touches on his Raging Fury. I mean, the dude's a 3-story tall crocodile who hates his brother. Have any of you seen Sasuke? Man's entire life purpose was to kill Itachi to the point where he became one of the strongest assholes in all of existence, but I digress. Now, this is all premature speculation, and depending on how you look at it, it's a nitpick. Not everything in a champion has to interconnect in a cohesive way, but it was something that raised an eyebrow for me. The second thing is a question of future balance. Riot has expressed time and time again they're not a fan of people going AP builds on 80 carries. AP Ezreal was nerfed, AP Kai'Sa was nerfed, AP Twitch was nerfed, AP Varus, heck, even AP Misfortune at one point. I think the reason why is because it makes things really difficult to itemize against. Hybrid champions have been phased out of the game for being naturally stronger than dedicated physical or magic attackers, as you have to buy both armor and magic resist against them, and there aren't that many multi-defense options that are good if there are any at all. Hybrid damage is basically a slightly weaker version of true damage, so by that logic, you can build health as an all-purpose countermeasure. But then we ran into Kai'Sa and Varus. Both of them have ridiculously high missing health damage, eliminating your last line of defense against them. Zeri's passive deals max health damage, and a lot of it. On top of that, you have to account for her physical damage from Burst Fire. I'm not saying she's exactly like Kai'Sa, but there are a lot of attribute similarities between the two, so Riot's gonna have to keep an eye out for how they're gonna balance her going forward. But on the bright side, Zeri doesn't have the same rushdown 1v9 playstyle as Kai'Sa, so I think that can keep her from getting too oppressive. I like how she plays though. I think it's a cool way to design her. If you think about it, using too many basic attacks drains her of her charge, so you have to spam her Q as much as you can to keep the energy levels high. And then Spark Surge's cooldown reduces every time she uses charge attacks, which means if you want to maximize her uptime, you then have to use attacks, thus taxing your resource management even further. And then you have Lightning Crash, a buff that theoretically lasts forever as long as you keep the charge going. You just have to keep attacking and keep charging. She's extremely momentum based, but in a technical way. It's not like Samira who rushes in and explodes everyone. Zeri is almost like, how do I put it? You know, she's kinda like a Dance Dance Revolution combo. You have to keep the rhythm going consistently while watching your tempo so as not to step too quickly, and every once in a while you encounter those hard parts in the song where your legs just start cooking. All in all, I think she's really neat. The shield nitpick is about the same as my nitpick about Vex's reset on her ult. It's not bad enough to completely ruin the champion, but I have a feeling they sort of forgot to pull the trigger on Chekhov's gun. Champions nowadays revolve completely around their passive, so when you see an element of absorbing shields, you would think everything about her is based on shields. So if I were to grade her, I'd say she's a solid 7 out of 10. She's no Jhin or Thresh, but she's no Yone or Viego either. What do you guys think about Zeri? Do you think she's gonna shake things up in the bot lane, or is she just another 200 years champion to ban? Let me know in the comments down below. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also consider following me on Twitter, joining my Discord server, and checking out my discussion video on Vex if you haven't yet. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching, and please, for the love of God, don't first time Zeri if you're on my team. Anyways, take care.